Well, this is going to be a tough game for the Saints to win.
You have a lot more faith in the Chiefs than I do.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome into this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Chiefs and Locked On Saints. We are your hosts, Chris Clark of Locked On Chiefs, myself, Ross Jackson, over at Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for being here with us as we break down this Monday Night Football matchup between the New Orleans Saints as they travel to the Kansas City Chiefs for a big-time prime time matchup. On today's episode, we're going to tell you everything that this game comes down to, which I think Chris and I are a little bit aligned here. It comes down to the trenches. We'll take a look at how Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs offense will look to produce without Rasheed Rice. And we'll take a look at the New Orleans Saints in this situation, who are going to be a little bit short on weapons probably when it comes to the offensive side of the football. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making this your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, Locked On Chiefs or Locked On Saints. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Crossover Thursday is presented by our friends at Prize Picks. Download the app and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So, Chris, I think that this is going to be a tough game for the New Orleans Saints to win, but you think I'm maybe a little bit too high on the Chiefs here for a sec?
Man, when you have Patrick Mahomes, you have to feel normally a lot more comfortable going into games every week. I just haven't this season so far. He has not played well. He's turned the ball over every single game so far. And that is going to be a key in this game for me is can he get to a point where he doesn't turn the ball over? If he does that, I think the chances go way up.
Yeah, absolutely. And the New Orleans Saints have been a team that, look, they haven't done they have been a little bit inconsistent over on the defensive side in terms of explosive plays and things like that, but they are a team that takes the ball away. So we'll be diving into stuff like that and much more. Chris, as the away team, we usually start with the away team on things like this. And so I'll start with what I think is going to be the biggest and most important, the biggest story, if you will, for the New Orleans Saints offense. And that's got to be the health question mark. Alvin Kamara dealing with broken ribs, still played through last week's game. He's also dealing with a hip injury. Taysom Hill dealing with a litany of injuries as well, had a bruised lung a couple weeks ago and then played last week and ended up leaving with an abdominal injury. Wide receiver Chris Olave, the team's number one wide receiver, he ends up right now having to play through a hamstring injury. So I just don't know how ready these players are going to be with an already beat up offensive line to really be able to contribute with Derek Carr at the helm, who, needs those weapons around him in order to really be able to run new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak's offense. So that's the big concern for me over on the offensive side so far.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you look at this Chiefs defense, and they have been very good this year. And I think that that's one of the things that they have continued to win by is defense. And I think that that's really kind of surprising being, covering this team. We've seen Mahomes play. We've seen this offense go. And it just hasn't been that way for the past, really the past couple of seasons. I do think that that's something that they got to get figured out, but I completely understand where you're coming from about having questions on the offensive side of the ball when it comes to injuries.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's something that both of these teams are dealing with. And of course, the Saints have some injuries over in their offensive line that I didn't mention, but are well documented. Their starting center, Eric McCoy's out for another 5 to 7 weeks dealing with an injury. Their starting right guard was out last week. We'll see if they end up getting him back. So that's what I'm looking for over on the offensive side. And look, Clint Kubiak, New Orleans Saints' new offensive coordinator, has been ranked as the best offensive play caller in the NFL for the majority of the first 4 games of the season. He's certainly aided by 40-plus point outputs over the course of the first 2 weeks. But I think another big story on the offensive side is kind of watching how this new offensive system continues to kind of sink its teeth in, kind of get its grounding, get its footing, all that kind of stuff. And that gets really challenging when you deal with a bunch of injuries over on that side of the football. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the thing that really sticks out to me though is there wasn't much defensive film to have an idea as to what you're going into the first couple of weeks. And that I think plays into how teams are going to be able to play you defensively. And so I think that's really what stuck out to me. You go back a couple of weeks against the Philadelphia Eagles, who had played horrible defense the week before, and then came in and actually performed pretty well against the Saints, where in a game I thought that the Saints were going to run away with. So I do think that actually plays into this, and the Chiefs have a great defensive coordinator in Steve Spagnuolo. So I do think that there's going to be some things that he's going to have in store for Derek Carr because he knows him very well.
Yeah. And Saints fans will remember Spags from his very short stint here in the city of New Orleans, as well as a defensive coordinator. And we've seen the incredible things that he's done over there. So things aren't going to be made easy for Derek Carr, who's currently 3-14 going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. And look, not all of those 3 wins coming in Derek Carr's best years with John Gruden. So just because of the offensive system and stuff like that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll elevate Derek Carr to a certain situation here. But look, they have familiarity with him. He has familiarity with them. So maybe there's something there that could go either way when it comes to these. When it comes to the Saints defense, to kind of flip the script here a little bit, I think the biggest thing for them is, you mentioned that Philadelphia Eagles game. That's a game where the Saints defense allowed only 3 points for the first 3 quarters, and then all of a sudden gave up a pair of touchdowns late, 61-yard catch and run to Dallas Goedert, the Philadelphia Eagles tight end, that set up a rushing touchdown for Saquon Barkley, but not before. Not didn't happen until after a 65-yard touchdown run by Saquon Barkley also broke out late in the game against the Atlanta Falcons in a really disappointing loss last weekend. The Saints actually took the lead late, but then weren't able to hold on to it thanks to a pass interference penalty. So the aggressiveness of the New Orleans Saints defense getting in their way there. So the big question mark is, or the big story here is, can the New Orleans Saints bounce back from 2 disappointing losses where their offense took the lead late, but the defense wasn't able to do enough to preserve it?
It's a great question, and when you go up against a team like like the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, you absolutely have to do whatever you can to try to slow them down early, because the big thing that you're going to be going up against is he is great at fourth quarter comebacks and just making drives count when they absolutely have to. Go back to the game against the Cincinnati Bengals, and I know there's a lot of people that want to complain about the pass interference call, but really the bigger thing with that is you give him 4 downs and he knows he's got a 4-down situation. He's going to take advantage of that, and generally speaking, he's going to come through.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming up next, we're going to dive more into the idea around Patrick Mahomes, because Patrick Mahomes, just like Derek Carr, is down some weapons, but can the Chiefs overcome that situation a little bit better than the New Orleans Saints? We'll dive into that, as well as the Kansas City defense here as we continue on with this crossover Thursday edition, Locked on Chiefs and Locked on Saints. Today's crossover Thursday episode of Locked on Chiefs and Locked on Saints brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. I went to my Game Time app before we started recording the show today just to see, I'm going to that Chiefs and New Orleans Saints game. What am I looking at? Well, I'm looking at some pretty decent ticket prices right now. And look, typically when it comes down to game time, the closer that you get to the event, the cheaper the tickets get. Zone deals, flash deals, so much more for you to check out over at Game Time today. And don't forget, it's not just sports, it's comedy, it's theater, it's concerts, it's so much more as well. So wherever you are, grab that Game Time app so that you can check out all the different events that are going on in your area. Toggle on all-in pricing as well, so that you see all your prices up front, not taken by surprise by any type of fees at checkout. And don't forget, you can also see your view from the seats as well. It's simple. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, everybody, continuing on with this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Chiefs and Locked On Saints, getting you ready for Monday Night Football. Chris Clark, host of Locked On Chiefs, myself, Ross Jackson, over at Locked On Saints. Chris, I know the big story around the Kansas City Chiefs right now has to be centered around the offense, and much like New Orleans, some of the injuries and health concerns. What's the biggest story going on over in Kansas City going into this one?
I'd love to be able to give a definitive answer as to what Rasheed Rice's injury is, but right now we don't know. He's out this week. Yeah, he's out this week. Everybody thought it was going to be an ACL. It looked like it was, a situation where he was going to have a torn ACL. But they've had multiple MRIs. They've done multiple tests. They they have not got to a point where they can say that it is a torn ACL at this point. So they're saying right now that we may not know until Monday what the injury is. So we'll see. It could be a swelling issue. It's possible. I've been hearing rumblings from different people. Mahomes even said, I think on Wednesday, that, maybe we can get Rasheed Rice back sooner rather than later. So I think there's optimism around the team that maybe it's not season ending, and that's a huge sigh of relief from the entire organization, I'm sure, especially Mahomes, who actually was the one that injured him, which is crazy enough as it is. But then you look at who else they're missing. I mean, they lost Hollywood Brown before the season even started. The first snap of the preseason, he goes out and he injures his clavicle. And, at that point, you have now lost your number one and your number two wide receiver. And those are both guys who I think we're going to have. Obviously, Rice had a huge impact on the offense the first several weeks. But Hollywood Brown, I think, was going to be the focal point of their offense. And I think that's shown the first several weeks that he hasn't been here, that they're trying to adapt and try to move the offense forward. And then you lose Isaiah Pacheco. So now you're in a situation where you're down your first two wide receivers and you're starting running back. And the guy that you thought was going to be your number two running back going into the season, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, has been on in a NFI, non-football injury, because of PTSD. And it sounds like it's possible he'll be back for this game. But those are two positions that's really hard to imagine how things are going to go. And then not injury related, but they benched their starting left tackle. And this is a situation where, we'll talk about the lines and how that's going to play into the trenches later, but their left tackle position has not been very good this year. And honestly, Joe Thuney at left guard hasn't been great either.
That's pretty big too. New Orleans, of course, they got somebody that the last time that he met up with Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl, at least got to Patrick Mahomes and Chase Young this offseason. So the Saints, of course, looking to generate that pass rush. But it is interesting to see both of these teams in very different conversations, despite the injuries and things like that. Like Kansas City Chiefs might be injured and banged up and all those stuff, but they're still an undefeated 4-0 team. The New Orleans Saints are on a 2-game losing streak, right? And potentially looking at a 3-game skid here, thanks to Monday Night Football up against Kansas City. So, the New Orleans Saints, maybe the more desperate team despite all of this. I don't know. Maybe that's one of those things that can potentially lift them up in this situation. Whereas Kansas City kind of dealing with those injuries and trying to monitor it. I wonder what the mentality is like for them dealing with that.
It's a great question. It's going to be interesting to watch this game and see how it plays out, because one of the things that's really stuck out to me with the Chiefs is you go back and you watch, they've allowed a touchdown every single game this year on the first drive. And then you go back and you watch what they've done the rest of the game, and it's like it's completely different. So you almost expect them at this point, and that's kind of how they played a lot of last season, is they'd allow a score early, and then they'd settle in and they get to the point where they could, hold down the fort. That's what they have to do on defense again this week. They're going to have to, try to get after Derek Carr and see how they can do that. But offensively, it's going to have to run through Travis Kelce. I mean, you have a new rookie wide receiver in Xavier Worthy, who had a great touchdown catch last week on a deep ball by Mahomes. But one of the things that's really stuck out with this offense is Mahomes is averaging, I think, just over 5 air yards per attempt.
Yeah.
Lowest,
it hasn't
one of the
been
lowest
the big
numbers
play
in the NFL.
offense we're used to, right?
It's a dink and dunk, and that's a big problem. And you have to be able to get that figured out. You have to get your offense to where it can move the ball better, and you have to have explosive plays. They're also down, I think, maybe 4th from last in the NFL in explosive plays on offense, and that's definitely not what you would expect from a Chiefs and Andy Reid offense.
No, not at all. What exactly is happening with, or has been happening with, Travis Kelce? 15 catches, 150 plus yards through the first 4 games, but 7 of those catches and just over 80 of those yards just came in the last game. Did he just have a slow start to the season, or was there something else that was going on in that situation?
Well, I think if you go back and you watch the game against the Falcons, I mean, you get 14 targets for Rasheed Rice. I mean, that takes a huge portion of what you're doing, and their focal point really shifted to him. And it made a lot of sense. He was playing so well, and he was getting yak yardage. He was catching the ball short, and like I said, the air yards per attempt is way down. So he was picking up huge yak yards. If you go back and watch some of the film with Travis Kelce, he's still getting open. He was still getting open before this last week. It wasn't a matter of him not getting open. It's a matter of the offense wasn't getting there. I mean, I went and rewatched some of the game against the Falcons, and they had him in blocking and on passing downs at times. Obviously, he's going to be in there blocking for rundowns. And then there were several times where he was a short outlet release type receiver. And Mahomes went deeper. Mahomes went to Rasheed Rice on a crosser that was a little bit deeper, or Justin Watson down the field a little bit versus just taking a short dump off to Kelce and see what Kelce can do. So I think it's a combination of things. I'm curious to see how the Saints, I apologize, try to attack Travis Kelce, because really the reality is that most teams have still been doubling him, but he's still finding ways to get open. I don't think it's a matter of him slowing down. It's just the offense has changed and they're trying to adapt at this point.
Yeah, well, Saints fans will remember very unfondly the last time that the New Orleans Saints tried to double team a tight end. 3 of their defenders ran into one another, and it turned into a 61-yard completion to Dallas Goedert. So we'll see. Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. So Dallas Goedert, 170 yards 2 weeks ago, the Philadelphia Eagles tight end. Kyle Pitts, the Atlanta Falcons tight end, 0 yards just last week. So I imagine Travis Kelce falls somewhere in between there when it comes to tight end play.
To be fair, though, Atlanta has never used Kyle Pitts. I don't understand it. He's a phenomenal talent, and they don't use him. And so I have a hard time believing that you can really take much from that, other than Atlanta just doesn't use the tight end position, and that makes no sense. Dallas Goedert having 170 yards, that's insane too. So Kelce could have a huge week, and the Chiefs are going to need him to have a huge week. But there's other guys that got to step up too. Justin Watson has to step up. Juju has to step up, and you're going to have to get Worthy more involved.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very excited to see that matchup in particular. The pass catchers of Kansas City up against the secondary of New Orleans, who, by the way, may be without Tyrann Mathieu starting safety. We don't know yet. We'll figure that out.
Is Willie Gay out?
Big one to watch. I think so. He looked like he had some kind of procedure on his hand. And so very unlikely, but hopefully the Saints will get Demario Davis back, because it's really hard to keep Demario Davis off the field. The fact that they kept him off of the field for 1 week is about the only battle the New Orleans Saints will win in that conversation. So we'll see how things go when it comes to Demario. Quickly over on the Kansas City Chiefs defensive side, what's kind of the biggest thing you're watching for there?
Biggest thing on that is Chiefs have been fantastic against the run this year, and I think it's really helped their entire defense, their defensive scheme. And you look at who they played. They played Derrick Henry, Chase Brown, and the other running back for the Bengals didn't do that great. And then you look at Bijan Robinson, I think was just under 3 yards a carry, and Dobbins was 3 yards a carry too. And the Chargers are a team that want to run the ball. Now, I understand they had some offensive linemen out, so that take that into account. But the Chiefs have been phenomenal stopping the run this year. And if I'm Kansas City, I'm looking at this Saints team and I'm going, okay, if I can stop the run, I'm going to try to force Derek Carr to beat us, because like you said earlier, and we kind of talked about before the show started, Kansas City knows Derek Carr really well. They played against him a ton. They know what he can do. They know what he can't do. And I do think that's a matchup that I actually really like in this game for the Chiefs, is the Chiefs defensive coordinator and their defense specifically against Derek Carr.
Yeah. And it's just, if you could take the run game away, that is the entire foundation of what it is that new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak is doing here in New Orleans, setting up the play action passes, setting up the, stacking the boxes and being able to stretch the field horizontally. Like it's your typical wide zone offense. It's what the New Orleans Saints want to do as well. So if Kansas City can limit that, that absolutely creates some issues for New Orleans on the offensive side. I want to continue that conversation because it gets us to the trenches, which is exactly where Chris and I think this game is going to be decided. This game just doesn't get any more cliche than that. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on and wrap up this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Chiefs and Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Chiefs and Locked On Saints, this crossover Thursday, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, where you can go ahead and get the early portion of the season started off with some big returns. Right now, the Kansas City Chiefs 5.5-point favorites at home on Monday night up against the New Orleans Saints. Maybe you like the New Orleans Saints to cover. They tend to, when the New Orleans Saints lose, they lose tight. They lose in some of those close games. So maybe you like the New Orleans Saints to cover. Maybe you like the upset, or maybe you like the Kansas City Chiefs to run away with this one. Well, no matter how you feel about it, you can get in on the action over at FanDuel today. And when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, don't forget they also have live betting as well, as those lines, props, stuff like that begin to move. You can also check out the latest stats and live play-by-play all in the same window as where you place your bets as well. It's really a one-shop one-stop shop at all for everything when it comes to your NFL experience on Sundays and Mondays. So to get started, head over to FanDuel.com, and if you're a new customer, you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's your first $5 bet to get $200 guaranteed at FanDuel.com. All right, everybody, wrapping up this crossover Thursday edition. Locked on Chiefs, Locked on Saints, brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, where you can head today. You're going to be able to get $50 instantly when you play $5 by using the promo code Locked On NFL when you download the Prize Picks app. Here to break down the Chiefs and the Saints' keys to victory for this matchup, what it is that they need to do to get a win. So, I'll start us off here with the away team stuff. I'll give you my three. We'll go Chris's three, and then we'll kind of break them down. But my three are pretty simple. We're looking to see if the New Orleans Saints can protect Derek Carr, give him some comfort, give him some time. That's got to be number one. Number two is that they need to be able to generate a pass rush over on the other side and maybe stop that comfort, maybe stop and throw off some of that timing for Patrick Mahomes in the offense. And then the final thing for me is that the Saints just have to be out of their own way. One of the biggest issues for New Orleans so far this season is that they haven't just been playing against the opponent across from them. They've had to play against themselves, and they've typically beat themselves on the wrong side of that conversation. So for me, Chris, those are the three things that New Orleans is going to have to do to even sniff the idea of an upset here.
And, I could basically copycat exactly what you said, because really, you look at this game, and one of the things I looked at before we started was the Chiefs are -4 in turnover differential. And that doesn't seem like that's a lot, but considering you've only played 4 games, that's not great.
Yeah.
And the only teams below them are the 2-2 Raiders, the 2-2 Philadelphia Eagles, and the 1-3 Tennessee Titans. So you have all teams that don't have a winning record, and somehow the Chiefs are 4-0, even though they've turned the ball over more than they've gotten it back. That's a huge problem. And when you talk about beating themselves, that's what I mean by beating themselves. Patrick Mahomes has thrown a pick in every single game. Carson Steele's put the ball on the ground twice. So that's something to watch for, although I don't know he's going to be starting in this game. He may not even really play that much in this game, considering it looks like Kansas City is kind of trying to move to Kareem Hunt based on what they did last week. And if Clyde Edwards-Helaire comes back and Samaje Perine is still available, maybe Carson Steele is going to be just a fullback and not really get the carries like it looked like he was going to do it early in the season. And then the big question is what's the Chiefs offensive line going to do? And can Patrick Mahomes start to trust their offensive line? Because the reality of going back and watching film with this team is he doesn't trust his offensive line, and it shows. Just about every single play that he is flushed out of the pocket, I take that back. Before last week, just about every play he was flushed out of the pocket, there was real pressure. Last week, you started to see happy feet where there wasn't necessarily pressure. He was expecting it to be coming. Well, he could have stayed there and made a different throw or looked downfield, and that's a problem. You have to trust your offensive lineman, and the Chiefs' offensive line really hasn't gotten it done, and it doesn't show in stats on PFF as much. But if you go watch the film, you'll watch the left side of the offensive line caving more often than not, and that is a severe problem.
Yeah, that's big. It's interesting. I think about how good this Kansas City defense has been, but part of that turnover ratio conversation where the New Orleans Saints have right now a +3 when it comes to their turnover ratio, just to compare the two here, is that the Kansas City Chiefs defense, the Kansas City Chiefs have only forced 3 turnovers so far. So interesting in that situation. New Orleans has forced 8 turnovers, one of the top in the NFL when it comes to that count at the moment. So
which doesn't sound good for Kansas City.
That doesn't sound great for Kansas City. That sounds a lot better for New Orleans than most of the things that I think of off the top of my head when I think about this matchup. And I think that like so much of this conversation sometimes too is like a conversation of reputation, right? Oh, it's the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think that carries some weight though, because there's, especially in a primetime environment, I get to experience Arrowhead Stadium for the first time, and I get to experience it at a primetime game. Incredible. Like, it's a tough environment to go in and win, that's for sure. But there are these little places where maybe you can see kind of the cracks in the foundation where the New Orleans Saints might be able to take advantage of something. Is that hopeful thinking? Is that like wishful thinking, or is there like a real vulnerability here?
Well, if you go back and watch, or if you go back and look at the Chiefs games, the Baltimore Ravens game, they almost lost and probably could have lost, I guess, if you look at it, because Likely basically comes down with like an inch of his shoe over the line, and they were going to go for
Right.
2. So could have had a loss there. The pass interference call, which I think most people would agree was a good call, puts the game in Kansas City's favor in that situation. And you look at the Falcons game, there was another pass interference call, the drive before the final. Right. And I mean, there's just lots of different things that Kansas City is, 1 or 2 plays away from being in a much worse situation record wise. And when you look at the injuries that they have, it would make sense for them to be in a much worse situation record wise. The issue that works in their favor is they have Andy Reid as their head coach, although that can also work against them at times, specifically if they get up early on somebody. But the other part of it is they have Steve Spagnuolo, and this defense has been lights out when it has mattered most. Chris Jones has played very well. The only time that he really hasn't played great, I think, was against the Falcons, where I think he only had 2 pressures, which was surprising because the Falcons had offensive linemen that were missing. The same type of thing that'll happen with the Saints, it sounds like, this week. And you expect a guy that is, wants to be the defensive player of the year, and I think has the talent to be defensive player of the year at times, to dominate those types of performances, especially considering they allow him to move around on the defensive line and basically line up where he wants to.
Right. Yeah, there's something about the Atlanta Falcons. For whatever reason, whenever their offensive line is hurt, they perform much better. Maybe they should reconsider who their starters are in those situations, but that is always seems to be the case for them. I don't know what that's all about.
It's just really weird because Cousins doesn't move. Like, he is such a statue in the pocket. You would think that that's going to be a problem, and somehow it just wasn't. So, something to watch. I'm really going to be curious to see how this game turns out, because there's a ton of speed that the Saints have, and obviously injuries can play into this, and we don't really know where those are going to be at this point, since it's a Monday night game. But Kansas City is in a situation where if they can find a way to get to 5-0, they have their bye week and they can regroup. They can try to figure things out going into a game against the San Francisco 49ers. And if you're sitting there at 5-0, you feel a lot better going up against the 49er team. And even if you drop to 5-1, you still feel great going into a much easier part of the schedule after the Saints and the Niners.
Yeah. This is a big part of it's so funny how much this aligns between the Chiefs and the Saints. The Saints schedule gets remarkably easier after this game and then their next game up against Tampa. And then after that, it gets a little bit easier depending upon what Denver ends up looking like. I know that defense has played really well over there, but the offense has been pretty putrid and very un-Sean Payton-like. But for New Orleans, going into this game, like, this is a narrative-changing game for them. It's one of the reasons why I say that maybe a little bit of the kind of desperation and charge that could potentially come from this game could work in New Orleans' favor. This one is one of those matchups for New Orleans where, like, if they come off these 2 more disappointing and in some ways fluky losses, because there's a lot of conversation about how the opposite of what you just talked about, to where you were saying, like, yeah, Kansas City's 4-0 now, but they could be much worse. A lot of people look at the New Orleans Saints and say, man, they're 2-2, but they could be much better if 1 or 2 things roll their way. So which one of these teams gets the good fortune to break their way might actually be the thing. Beyond the injuries, beyond the trenches, beyond the pass rush, all that other stuff, it just might be who gets the break in this one that ends up having the lasting impact on the win-loss records.
Well, and you talk about games that are coming up. The Raiders, Bucks, and the Broncos follow the 49ers after the Saints game. So it is going to be a little bit easier. Obviously, the Bucks are a better team than I would have thought that they were going to be. But
sure.
Going up against a team against the Raiders that don't really have a QB to speak of, I feel a little bit better about than going up against a team that, obviously, I think the Saints can be a good team. And you're right. They're just a couple of plays away. You take away that Dallas Goedert touchdown that Dallas Goedert catch. That game is completely different. And I will admit, I didn't think Koo had a chance at making that field goal. So I did not think he had that leg.
Yeah. I think it's my fault. I don't think I've ever seen that guy miss a field goal. So I blame that. I blame that all on myself. So Chris, what do you think about a prediction for this matchup? Where are you going with this one?
For me, I think that this is I feel better about this game than I probably have felt against the Chargers game. And I say that because like I said earlier, they know Derek Carr. They have a pretty good idea of how to defend him. The thing that is curious to me, and that I'm really curious to see what the Saints do, is Olave, does he play? If he plays, that changes things for me. Kamara can change things as well. Obviously, the offensive line is going to be hurt for the Saints, so that tends to favor Kansas City in some regard. But if they can't get pass rush and they allow Derek Carr to sit back there, he's going to find openings. He's not incapable of being a good quarterback. It's just a question of, can he get it done on game day? And the Chiefs have had to blitz a lot, and that can be a problem, especially going up against a veteran quarterback. So to me, I think Kansas City still finds a way to win this game. My bigger thing is that I would wish that I could feel like the Chiefs would score, 27, 28 points. I don't know that they're going to get that done. So I'm going to go 24-20 Kansas City.
Very close to me. I think this game really, there's a world in which this game goes either way. And I think it comes down to, can the Saints run the ball? Can the Saints not run the ball? In addition to some of our trench talk that we've spoken about, if the Saints can't run the football, I think this is 23-20 in favor of the Chiefs. If the Saints can run the football and control the clock and kind of do some of the things that they did over the course of the first 2 weeks with being a little bit more explosive, then obviously it's a bit of a different conversation, maybe 23-20 the other way. But as of right now, based on not knowing the health of this team, I think this is Kansas City game 23-20. So I would take the Saints against the spread, but not necessarily taking the Saints to pull off the full-on upset in this one. So that's the way that I'm looking at it as well. Chris, absolutely excellent. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. If you want more on this matchup, both Chris and Ryan over at Locked On Chiefs are going to be breaking it down on their Friday episode. We'll be doing the game plan over at Locked On Saints. What do you do to take advantage of maybe some of those Chiefs weaknesses if you can find them? We'll be breaking that down over on Locked On Saints as well. So make sure you're checking us out here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer on the show, letting us be here with you. We'll see you soon here again, Locked On Chiefs and Locked On Saints.